light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. There are so many things that seem to operate within society and within our personal lives almost as if on autopilot. That function that they use in airplanes, that when there's a particularly long flight happening, the pilot can put it on autopilot and the plane essentially flies itself according to the course that is plotted in. And the pilot can take a break and get up from his seat and so forth, and the plane essentially is just flying itself. It would be, I suppose, like putting a car on a big long road and tying the steering wheel in place so that it steered itself down the lane with nobody behind the wheel. The problem with that, of course, is if you encounter anything different along the way, or when a special circumstance arises and something needs to be done to respond to the special circumstance. Even when nothing is happening, to be able to ask, is everything all right? And to be able, for the pilot in an airplane, for example, to look at the instruments and say, yes, we're on course, fuel pressure's good, fuel level is fine, the oil pump's working fine, the wind speed is great, altitude's great. You can look at all the different dials and say, yes, I can confirm everything is fine. But to have the freedom to question whether it's okay, and perhaps the pilot to question from time to time whether it's okay so that he remembers to check, rather than just assuming that everything is fine and not have any idea until something goes really tragically wrong. My point is simply needing the ability to question, is this right, is it not, and to confirm what we know. And questioning something for the purpose of confirming is really, it's not an attack. It's nothing that anyone needs to be defensive about. It's just like, yeah, okay, good, thank you for telling me to check. Alongside of that, I guess, some people have suggested to me that sometimes the reason people don't like to be questioned is that they actually feel rather insecure about what they're doing. And so when you question, are you sure you know the way there? Yes, I know the way there. Well, the louder they respond, the more you get the sense that they aren't really sure that they do know. And if they would instead be honest and say, well, I'm not sure, or I don't know. Well, would you like to stop and buy a map at the next gas station? Would you like to stop and ask directions? There seems to be a running gag that men never want to stop and ask for directions, but I guess I was always the exception to that. It's not that we need to pretend confidence or pretend expertise we don't have. Questioning is what helps us focus on whether the goal or the objective is being achieved, instead of putting our ego in the way and saying, this isn't about whether or not a good job gets done, this is about whether or not I am perceived as an expert through it. And I would say, no, it's about whether or not a good job gets done. If we love each other unconditionally, it's like, we love you, you're fine, you're our friend, we're not going to leave you behind or think badly of you. We just want to be sure that the objective is being achieved. In some places, though, that kind of insecurity has gotten into our laws and into our administrations to where people don't like being questioned. They don't have permission. And then because that is a partial breakdown in communication, then all sorts of additional information doesn't get conveyed. And then you wind up with people who didn't get the information, don't know, and may be quite alarmed to find out that we're dealing with a situation here and we don't want you to panic, so we're not going to tell you about it. My former life partner worked with fixing oil plants, oil refineries and power plants and chemical processing plants and all kinds of things. And he came home from work one day and said that he had been at a particular business where he was fixing some kind of hydrogen furnace, I guess. And I said, oh, really? And it says, yeah, it has a temperature regulator And if the temperature doesn't regulate correctly, then the furnace overheats and blows up. And he said, so basically we came within 30 minutes of blowing up the east half of the Denver metro area. And it's like, oh, great. But that's not the kind of thing you announce, because everyone would panic. But it really wasn't an emergency, because he knew how to fix the gauge, and 30 minutes was plenty of time to get everything back on track so that it never became a dangerous situation. By mentioning that, I'm trying to show that I understand the rationale for not making certain things known to the public. The problem with that is when governments keep too much secret from their citizens, and the citizens have no idea what their government is doing. And then when moral choices get more and more and more compromised. The example that comes to mind, because it's one that I remember every time I ride my motorcycle anywhere, is, well, at the time it would have been Bradley Manning, who finally came out as a trans woman and is now Chelsea Manning. And some regard Chelsea Manning as a hero who alerted the American people to the fact that the United States government was in fact responsible for war crimes, that the activities we were doing at a place called Guantanamo Bay were in fact things that, if they had happened during World War II and been done by the Nazi regime, there were Nazis who were executed for doing similar things. These are war crimes, things that are done during wartime that exceed certain moral limits, and demonstrations of torture and so forth. Horrible, horrible things that should not be done by any government. And that's why they're defined as being war crimes. And so because Chelsea Manning had access to information and revealed it to the American public, we now know that the United States can never again say that it is not guilty of war crimes. It can only say that it has never been prosecuted for them. But it's a known fact now that these things happened. Will justice ever be done? I have no idea. The tragic part of that to me is that on one side you have people who believe that Chelsea Manning was a traitor by disclosing classified documents. On the other hand, you have people who believe that Chelsea Manning was a hero because of alerting the American people, the citizens, to what their government was doing that was positively immoral, wrong, illegal, absolutely evil. And without that kind of accountability, there was no way for the citizens to do anything about getting their government back on track. And some people would argue whether or not the government ever did get back on track, or whether it ever will. That's an ongoing struggle. But to me, it is better that this information is known, that the citizens can make informed choices, and not just in this situation, but in most situations. It seems that there is virtually no government or politician I've ever heard of that will behave perfectly without being carefully watched. Accountability and transparency are very important values to me as a citizen. I need to know what my government is doing so that I know that it's not doing things that would be classified as war crimes. In a similar sort of way as Chelsea Manning, the other name that comes to mind is Nelson Mandela, who was in prison for quite a number of years. I thought someone mentioned to me that it was over 20 years, but I'm not exactly sure what the figure was, but it was quite a long time. And after being released from prison and a number of political shifts happening in South Africa, he went on to become the president of the country. And how amazing his story is. And to have gone through all those years in prison not knowing if that was the end of the line or if anything good would follow. And in both of these cases, coming back to this point of, do we have the ability to question? Do we have the ability to ask our government the questions that reveal, are you behaving yourself or not? And if you are behaving yourself, then you shouldn't have anything to hide from me. And if you're not behaving yourself, then there's something I need to find out to put a stop to it. The On the flip side of that, of course, though, is whether the citizens have been prepared to deal with the information that is to be released. If the people in Denver had known that we have a hydrogen furnace here that is overheating, but it only takes 2 minutes to fix it, and we've got 30 minutes to go before it explodes. And everyone could just calmly say, well, you have 30 minutes, get it fixed. You only need 2 of those minutes, so fix it. And everybody could remain calm and know that we were never in any danger. The challenge to our government, and the thing we need to hold our government accountable to, is that we're getting the information in a way that educates the citizens how to respond in time of crisis. It would be like saying, in my elementary school, we had regular fire drills so that everybody knew what to do in the event of a fire, and everybody knew what to do in the event of a tornado, because we did have tornadoes that went through my hometown, and I still remember doing these drills where the alarm would go off and everybody would leave their desk and walk quickly and orderly down the hallway and into the basement and along this tunnel that we didn't even know was there until the first tornado drill. But they explained this is where you would wait until the all clear signal came, and we know that the tornado's gone. By having those fire drills, there was no need to panic if a tornado siren ever went off. We knew what to do. By having a fire drill, if the building ever did catch fire, we would know what to do. There'd be no need to panic. By knowing how to respond to a national crisis, there'd be no reason to panic. We would know what to do. And in that sense, I kind of envy what I was told, the system that was used, I believe it was in Norway, something to the effect that the standing military is extremely small, maybe only a couple thousand people, but that pretty much 98% of the country had been trained in national defense, so that every man, woman, and child in the country could be mobilized for national defense overnight if the crisis ever warranted. But they didn't put a lot of money into maintaining a standing military the way the United States does. It would be a far more efficient system if everybody knew what to do and everybody was well trained in how to respond. But we didn't have to be putting all this money into maintaining all the expenses of maintaining this massive amount of real estate and equipment and so on. The United States being what it is, though, part of what keeps this country on track at all is the ability to question, that there have to be ways that we can speak up, that people like Chelsea Manning can say, this is going on and the government isn't telling you. And I really don't think this information should be kept secret from the government. And I agree with her completely that no, this should not be kept secret. This is not the way professional, respectable, honorable military people behave, or the way respectable, honorable statesmen behave. It's where personally I distinguish between a politician and a statesman. A politician makes deals. A statesman is an expert in governance, creating systems that keep the distribution at a fair and just and equitable level, so that, yeah, you can have rich people, you can have poor people, but there's no starving people, there's no homeless people, there's no problems that are simply being ignored instead of constructively dealt with. That's where I look at the example of George Washington as someone who was a true statesman. And I love the idea that I heard, or his idea that I heard, that he wanted the presidency to be a volunteer position, and wanted to really underscore that being a congressman or a senator was a position of national service, not a career opportunity to become a multimillionaire. And in any case, not to get too far into politics, because what I really wanted to focus on is the questioning and having the ability to question. And if you don't have the information, how would you know to question? And if you're living in a wealthy enclave and you don't know what poor people are experiencing, how would you know to question whether it actually makes sense to be spending exorbitant amounts of money on more than you need, I guess. I mean, there was one time where the real estate prices in the Denver metro area were skyrocketing, and the parade of homes that would go on every year, where they would show the newest and latest and greatest and best houses that could be built, and they were all $300,000 to $500,000 homes at that point. And this is a number of years in the past, actually. And it occurred to me that if a family could qualify to purchase a $500,000 home, and if instead they chose to live in a $100,000 home in a modest middle-class neighborhood, that on the difference between the two they could pay a private tutor for their children's education for 20 years. And I just thought, what a ludicrous indication of where our values are not. That when we're putting that much into having more house than we need, instead of channeling it into our children's education. You know, ultimately, none of us is going to be here forever, and the wealthy houses that I see being built today, I took a housing and interiors course in high school where we actually went out and saw builders building houses and studied how they were built and what they were built of and how long these materials would last and so forth. And based on what I learned in that class, the houses that are being built now these are not forever houses. These are houses that in 50 to 70 years will be falling down. The glue in the boards will be failing and everything will wear out, and they will simply need to be torn down and replaced. And in the meantime, they're being sold for exorbitant prices. But the notion of building a house that isn't designed to last, it kind of feeds into capitalism, I suppose, but it makes paupers of all the people who live in the area. And the notion of why do we put so much money into a house instead of into education, instead of into societal systems? During the Eisenhower administration, President Eisenhower, the tax rates on wealthy people were very high, but they were still living as very wealthy people. They weren't destitute or anything. But because the tax rates were really very high, Eisenhower was able to build the interstate highway system that now connects the entire country and is used so extensively. How would we function without it? But it took a specific kind of societal system to create to build that infrastructure. That system is no longer in place, and it's anybody's guess how long the infrastructure will last before everything really begins to fall apart. This is where our ability to question our government and hold it accountable and to say that one of the perks, I guess, of being wealthy is that there is automatically this sense of noblesse oblige, that the nobles, the aristocracy, are obligated to take care of the society around them, the country upon which they depend, that if the wealthy don't take care of the working class, there won't be a working class to support the wealthy. And if the wealthy take care of the working class, then the crime rates will go down because people will have what they need, and the wealthy will get to live in a safe and prosperous country. A much more ideal living situation, instead of having alarms on everything and having to be totally paranoid about lawsuits and all sorts of things because of how unbalanced everything is. Chelsea Manning remains one of my heroes, though, kind of like Nelson Mandela would be to a lot of other people, because a number of years ago, when the whole thing was going to court over what's going to happen to Bradley Manning, who later became Chelsea Manning, there were a number of us who did a demonstration, and I gave a speech on the west steps of the state capital of Colorado, speaking in favor of Bradley Manning and the duty of citizens to speak up and to hold our government accountable, and transparency in government, and so on. And part of that, we did the demonstration. There were a number of us who rode motorcycles down the street to the demonstration, and parked our motorcycles there. And part of it was that there was a woman who had this flashlight, this plastic flashlight torch that she had tied to the bar on the back of her motorcycle, and she had ridden with that in support of Bradley Manning all the way from the West Coast all the way to Colorado. And the idea was that it was supposed to travel across the United States to Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, we couldn't find anyone else who was willing to take it the rest of the way, and so she gave the torch to me. And that torch, in honor of now Chelsea Manning, is still tied to the handlebars of my motorcycle. And so every single time I get on my motorcycle, I remember the importance of speaking out, and of transparency in government, and truthfulness, and genuinely being an honorable people, and holding our government to be honorable as well, because the government will not be honorable on its own. It's up to us to require it to be honorable, to remain honorable, and to hold it accountable when it's not. And just to remember that this is not just an isolated avenue. This is the same sort of struggles that are going on within quite a number of religions and denominations of Christianity as well. There are church leaders who need to be reminded that we are not to stagnate at the level that theology, at the level at which theology was written hundreds or even thousands of years ago. We are to be a people focused on wisdom and love, who address situations within our own times, many of which did not exist during the times that sacred text was written. And so we look to the sacred text to give us principles, to give us guidance within the current time. And if there are church leaders who are using those sacred texts in ways that keep us from acting with wisdom and love, that we need to hold those leaders accountable. Kind of like this one wonderful episode of a TV show called Designing Women, which I think I mentioned in the past also, but it keeps coming back because it was so wonderful. There is an episode where the character Charlene is talking with her minister, and she's basically addressing the role of women in the church and missionaries who dedicated their lives to spreading their theological and spiritual insights and serving people in other countries. And she doesn't want them devalued and dismissed and demeaned, and just because of being women. Their contribution should, whatever positive contribution they made, should be every bit as valued as any contribution made by a man. And her pastor looks at her and says, "I don't think we should question God on this." And she looks back at him without missing a beat and says, "I'm not. I'm questioning you." That sort of questioning is what keeps us on track. That's what keeps us healthy. It what keeps us awake and aware. When we don't do the questions because it's uncomfortable or inconvenient or it might offend somebody, well, these are things that need to be talked about. And if they're not talked about, if they're not discussed openly, then, as was it Martin Luther King who said, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good to do nothing. When we don't question, we're doing nothing, and we're enabling the problem. We're enabling the propagandists and the promoters, the people who want everyone to believe that this is the way it is, and nobody bothers to look at whether or not it's true, but no one's allowed to question whether it's true. And then in theological school, when a professor would make a statement and I would question it, and I was kind of surprised that the professor would be offended, because to me, they told me when I got to college and also to theological school that everything should be questioned. Well, they forgot to say everything except your professors, because some professors were not ready to be questioned. But what I found more astonishing is that the professors were more committed to their ideologies than they were to their students. That a professor might be so committed to presenting God as Father with total insensitivity to someone who had been abused by their father within the student population of the classroom. It doesn't have to be that way. God is whatever God needs to be. God is the embodiment of highest wisdom and greatest love, and that wisdom and love may be written into the fundamental laws of the universe in a way that doesn't require any personification of deity. But there is a perfection that is beyond us and above us and around us and even within us, even within the functioning of our own bodies, that is so astounding and so profound that something terrible happens and there is a response. The body adapts, or the environment around us adapts, and in ways that human thinking hasn't begun to grasp yet. It is beyond our reach for now, but as we continue reaching, as we continue questioning, and as we insist upon the right and the freedom to question, and having the information to ask intelligent questions, spiritually, intellectually, socially, in every conceivable way, we can keep growing, and we can be more than any previous generation ever believed possible. Thank you for watching. I do hope that what I've shared in the last half hour has been helpful to you.